Hey everyone, and welcome back to Inside the Offer. I'm your host, Nick Chamberlain, and I'm going to change things up a little bit. I'm going to take some of my own advice that I've been giving others and start doing some solo episodes. And we're going to dive a little bit into my offer and my business, and so that hopefully it can also help you with your business. So if you haven't listened to any of the previous episodes, feel free to go listen to them. I interviewed some wonderful guests about their business and how it operates. But I've also been noticing that a lot of other people are just interviewing other people about their business and their life. It's not really giving or providing any value for the listeners. So I'm trying to take a step back and figure out, okay, how can my podcasts be valuable to you, the listener? And one of the new things that I'm going to be going over is how to use podcasting as a way to grow your business and all the different elements that comes with podcasting. And of course, there are a bunch of podcasts out there that talk about podcasting, but I'm going to be taking the viewpoint from growing your business and using it as a way to generate leads, and those leads turn into sales, and those sales turn into clients. And in this episode in particular, I'm going to be going over my process for launching a podcast. And I have gone through many ways of launching a podcast, and I have dialed in a pretty good system and format that works really well with anyone. So we're going to go step by step on how to launch a podcast and how long it actually takes to turn your podcast into a reality. And if this is your first time listening to me, I just want to give you a little bit of background on who I am and where I came from, just so you can get a little understanding of what I am doing and why I am doing it. So I began my professional career in 2014. I graduated from college from Texas State, where I met my wonderful wife, Martha, and I moved across the country from Texas to sunny San Diego, where I was an audio/radio engineer for a nonprofit organization called Catholic Answers. And it was my daily duty to engineer 10 hours of live call-in radio and then take that radio show and convert it into a podcast format. And of course, we also had other podcast shows that I was editing, producing, and publishing. So each and every week, I was publishing many podcast episodes. And of course, if you've been to San Diego, you may have noticed it is slightly more expensive than the rest of the country. Okay, it is pretty expensive. And when I was living there, I got married to Martha. We had 2 kids, and I maxed out my position. There's only so much you can do as an audio engineer. Even if you max out your skills and you are the best audio engineer, the position remains the same. So what I did, I started to think outside the box. What were some ways I could bring in additional income into the household so I could provide a better living for my family? And we wanted a home. So I was like, how do I generate more revenue? I could find a different job, I could take a different career path, or I could start my own thing. So what I did, I started to think about all the different ways I could use my audio engineer skills to make money. And at this point, I didn't know anything about business at all. So I was like, oh, I know how to mix and master bands and record bands. So I was doing that. I knew how to record voices, like for a radio show, so I would do that, whether it was on a film set or some kind of commercial project. And ultimately, I started my own podcast on audio engineering to interview other audio engineers so I could figure out which kind of audio engineer do I want to be. And after 60 episodes, I determined I no longer wanted to be an audio engineer. And at the same time, I also discovered the podcast called The 6-Figure Home Studio. And it was because of this podcast with Brian Hood and Chris Graham that really sparked my interest in business. And I remember every single episode where there was a book recommendation, I would go out and buy that book. I remember one of the first books that was recommended was called The E-Myth Revisited. And after reading that book, my eyes just opened up and I kind of saw and understood the world of business and how it could operate. I wanted to create some system and process and business to deliver the most amazing experience for the client. It took me a little while to figure out which industry I wanted to go into as a business owner. But of course, I look at all the skills that I have and had from everything I was learning. It's just kind of skill stack those skills and create an offer. And long story short, I ended up going into the podcast production industry because, when you have two little ones at home, you can edit and produce podcasts at night in your home without having to invite strangers into your house and set up equipment and record and be loud. And when you're living in an apartment, you can't really do that anyways. And so that was the best business model for me to choose. And so far, it has been an amazing experience. And so in 2021, my family and I moved from San Diego to Texas. And my wife has spent the last 3 years as a speech language pathologist providing for the family, which allowed me to grow my business. And this year, January 1st, 2024, I have gone 100% in on my business. My wife, she is at home now with the kids, and this is what I'm doing. I'm running Every Word Media. I'm producing podcasts, and I'm so excited for this year. Okay, now let's get back into my launch process and what it actually looks like. And so if you're looking to start a podcast, you could actually start a podcast in a day if you wanted to. You could literally take your phone, record a voice memo for like however long you want. It can be 30 seconds. It could be an hour. You could just talk. And then you could take that voice file. You can upload it to a hosting site like Buzzsprout, Co-Host, Libsyn, one of those places where you host audio files. And you're going to need to submit that audio file to Apple Podcasts and Spotify at least. And before you can submit your audio file or your RSS feed to those different distribution platforms, you need your show art, which is you could hire someone to do it or you could just create it in Word Art. And then after that, it could take up to 24 hours, maybe less, after you submit your podcast to Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And there you go. It's live. I mean, it's not going to benefit you or the listener, but you could potentially launch a podcast in a day. But that's not the system that I would tend to give advice on it or how to do it. So here is my system and basically how long it takes to go through it. So let's get started. First off, when it comes to crafting your podcast show into existence, you're going to want to plan your podcast and actually think about it and brainstorm and sit down with yourself or a friend or a family member or a loved one or, anyone, and just have a discussion. You're going to want to discuss, well, what is the ultimate goal and purpose of your podcast? Is it going to be to you just want to grow an audience? Do you want to network and connect with other people? Or do you want it to be a source of lead generation where after people are listening to your episodes, they're contacting you and wanting you to hire them to be your coach or your service provider? Or do you just want to talk about something fun and have your product or your business sponsor your podcast? You need to have a deep understanding of your purpose behind it, because podcasting it's pretty difficult, especially when 90%, let me look this up. So right now I'm reading an article on Webbycaster, and you can Google it too. How many podcasts will reach episodes 21 or more? So it turns out the top 10% of the world's most successful podcasts is made up of 200,000 of them, of which 90% of them will also be dead by the time they reached episode 20. And so we come to the elite, that 1% made up of 20,000 podcasts that make it to episode 21. So your competition is not the 2 million, 3 million, 4 million podcasters out there. It's the 20,000 podcasters who didn't give up. So basically, most people don't make it past 20 episodes. And if you can make it past 20 episodes, you're going to be the top 10% of podcasts. All right? So another article I was just reading, there are 3 to 4 million podcasts out there on podcast statistics in 2023. But according to Amplify and Pod News, 44% of the podcasts have less than 3 episodes. Only 720,000 podcasts have more than 10 episodes. Okay, so in terms of blogs or YouTube or whatnot, podcasting is not saturated at all. And people just stop doing it after 10 or 20 episodes. And of course, I recommend that you do at least 52 episodes to start with. Plan 52 episodes. Do a year's worth of podcasting. Or if you're doing bi-weekly, 2 years. Okay? And then you'll be able to see if this is right for you or not. So why would someone do something as difficult as podcasting? Well, I mean, there are a few reasons, but one is that it shows that you're the expert and that you know what you're talking about. And I think most importantly, it allows listeners to personally connect with you. Yes, I can share all these fun little details on social media, but you're not going to know who I am. You're not going to know who that potential coach is that you want to hire for your business. But if you're listening to their podcast, you're going to get to know them in a pretty intimate way that you're going to discover right away. Ooh, I like this person, or, oh, I'm glad I didn't sign up and work with that person. You know, for example, I'm married. I'm 32. I have 3 kids. I have a 7-year-old daughter. I have a 4-year-old son and a 1-year-old son. My daughter has cerebral palsy and Charcot-Marie tooth. I discovered I had Charcot-Marie tooth this past May. So a small percentage of people are going to listen to this and be like, I understand what he's going through. And they're going to connect with me on a more personal way. Other people are going to be like, yo, bro, you are way too young or you are way too old. I never want to have kids, or you already have grandkids and you know what I'm about to go through. I think it's just an amazing way to get to know someone and to connect with them. I mean, I've done that myself. I've listened to The 6-Figure Creative for 2 years. And after listening, Brian opened up his coaching program and it was just at the right time, at the right place. And after listening to him for 2 years, I was like, I know what he knows. I may not love his personality, but I know that he is going to support and help me with my business. So I did, and that helped me a lot. And another guy is the Graham Cochran, who has the Graham Cochran Show. And he plugs his free irresistible resource in every single episode. And I just had to watch it. It was a 30-minute video on how to start your online business. And afterwards, I was sold. I had to start an online business. And then eventually purchase his courses and whatnot. So personally, that's the power of podcasting, and I've seen it more and more with every single podcast I listen to. Once I personally enjoy listening to the host, anytime they make a recommendation, whether it's a book or something, I usually go buy it or download it, or I take some sort of action. And when you start your podcast, people are going to see you as the expert. And when you start making recommendations, people will take those recommendations to heart. And when you start providing some call to actions or some actionable steps to take, people will take those actions. I know it'll help your business. It will. It will. So it's hard, but it's fun. And it's very rewarding. So what else goes into planning your podcast? So now we got your goal, your purpose, and your big why. You also want to do some brainstorming. What's the premise? What is the podcast going to be about? What's the promise that your podcast will deliver? What will your listeners gain after listening? Who is the target audience? I'm sure everyone listening has heard about the ideal client avatar. You got to do the same thing when it comes to podcasting. You got to picture who is that ideal listener that's listening and how are they going to benefit from your podcast? And then how are your services going to benefit them even more? So basically, if you already have an ideal client established, that's going to be basically your ideal target audience. Then brainstorm some topics, some ideas, and some overall arching themes that you will talk about. What is helpful, I've learned, is to create some content buckets. So create, 3 to 5 main themes that you're going to be talking about. And under those 5 themes, list 10 different ideas. And then you're going to have 50 episode ideas ready to go. Heck, I would go ahead and try to do 20 in each one. Be prepared for 2 years of weekly podcasting after a single brainstorm session. And then when we're planning our podcast, you're also going to have to decide which podcast category will you be in. And you can view all the options on Apple Podcast categories list, or you can check the show notes and I will put the link. There are about 26 options. Let me go over a couple of them just so you know what I'm talking about. All right, so some of the main ones are arts, business, comedy, education, fiction, government history, health and fitness, kids and family, leisure, music, news, religion and spirituality, science, society and culture, sports and technology, true crime, and TV and film. But of course, inside of those main categories, there are some subcategories. So for example, in business, you can be part of the careers, entrepreneurship, investing, management, marketing, nonprofit, and under the arts, you can be part of the books, designs, fashion and beauty, food, performing arts, visual arts. And if you want the full list of all the categories, check the show notes. I'll put them there. Now, after you have your premise, your promise, and your purpose, and all the topics and themes that you're going to talk about, you're going to want to write a 3 to 4 sentence description of your podcast. And this description is what you're going to use to put in the Spotify and Apple Podcast description. So once you have that ready to go, you're good to go for the next step. Naming your podcast is going to be a beautiful step. So first plan your podcast, and now you have a great understanding of what it's going to be. Now let's name your podcast. Come up with a list of a bunch of different names. And then you're going to ask yourself a few questions. Is the name of this podcast already taken? So type it into Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Does that podcast name already exist? Of course, you can launch podcasts with the same name as other people's, but I don't recommend that. Now, when you're considering the name, is it easy to spell and to say and to remember? Also, I would Google the podcast name as well. You'll also want to double check to see if the URL is available. And is this podcast name available for all your ideal social media accounts? So I made sure that InsideTheOffer.com was available. I made sure that Inside the Offer was on Facebook, on Instagram, LinkedIn. I kind of searched all over the internet, make sure it didn't exist already. So make sure you do the same thing when it comes to your podcast name. And then after you got your podcast name, we're going to go ahead and start designing your podcast artwork. So there's 2-3 different ways you can go with this. You can design your podcast artwork yourself if you're a creative and a designer. You can hire someone else to do it. Okay, so those are 2 different ways to go about it. Or I guess third, do it yourself, but then go to an AI tool generator and do that and whatnot. And I don't know. I like the idea of supporting other people in their craft. So if you have the funds and the ability, I would hire someone to do it for you. And then you get to grow another connection and establish with someone else. It's always good to support the economy and other people. That's why I like business and going into business. We're here to help each other out and to grow the economy and to help each other provide for our families and to grow our society. Well, that's just me. And if you need some ideas on podcast artwork, just go on to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and go to your category that you want to be in and look at the top 10 episodes and see what they're doing. And you can pick and choose from what you like or you don't like. Also, you can go to the new and noteworthy section in Apple Podcasts and see how their podcast artwork is designed. And then take notes and see what you like and don't like. Send those ideas to your design friend who's going to help you to create your podcast artwork. And of course, it needs to be 3,000 by 3,000 pixels. But I don't know if you need all those details. But it's just fun designing your artwork. Yep. And the next step, we're gonna pick your music. Picking your music. Now, music can be a little challenging, but to keep it simple, I have a subscription to Artlist.io. There's a bunch of other subscription models that you can pay yearly or monthly. But you got to be careful, because if some of the subscription places, if you stop paying for it, you no longer have the rights to it, and your podcast can be flagged for royalty rights violations. So do your research. It's going to be worth it, because you don't want to pay a fee or a fine or have your show removed off of mainly YouTube or other platforms that are checking these songs. It's not going to work out really if you pick a pop song and then download it from YouTube and then put it on your show. There's a high possibility you can get in trouble for that. So go to a music subscription. You can Google that. I've been using Artlist because I was reading in the fine print. If I cancel Artlist, I'm still going to have the rights to the songs that I purchased during my time of having a subscription. But I'm not going to stop paying for it. So I'm always going to be having a subscription. All right. So we're almost done with the beginning half of crafting your show. We got all the big meaty stuff out of the way. So you've planned your podcast. You've named your podcast. You designed your podcast artwork. The next step is to outline your episode. How do you want the flow of your episode to go? Do you want an evergreen intro at the very beginning of every single episode? You can listen to mine. I think it's way too long, so I'm probably going to change it. Or do you just want to have a unique intro every episode? A very common outline I've seen on many podcasts is you have a short intro hook, and then that short intro hook of some valuable statement that's supposed to hook the listener, and it goes into an evergreen intro, and then that evergreen intro flows into the episode intro. And then that episode intro then flows into the meat and potatoes of the episode. And then within the episode, you could have sponsors. You could have your own call to action. You could put in sound clips. You can have commentary on it, whatever you want. And then by the end of the episode, you can go into an outro sequence, and then that can be an evergreen. So what I mean by evergreen is you record it one time, and it's on every single episode moving forward. And of course, you can change it over time. But it's just the same intro and outro. That's what I mean by evergreen. Or in your outro, you can have music and have your own call to action. That is pointing people to take some kind of action. Whether that is in your episode, if you were solving a specific problem, and then you give the listener some actionable steps to take. Or you just tell them to rate and review and to share with friends and family and, I don't know, whatever you want. It's your podcast. You can do whatever you want with it. There are no rules to podcasting, but when I've been evaluating and studying the top podcasts, I'm kind of just going by what they're doing, what's been working for them. You know, I have worked on podcasts that get, 100 downloads per an episode. And I have also worked on podcasts that get multiple million downloads per episode. And it's all kind of the same format, intro, episode, outro. But of course, you do what you want. It's your show. Okay, and that's pretty much planning your podcast. And the next step after that is to get your equipment. If you don't already have equipment, I can do a whole nother show or episode on podcast equipment itself. But basically, I would go with a dynamic microphone because most people don't have a space that's going to be very sound friendly. And so there's two options of microphones to choose from. You can have your dynamic or a condenser microphone. A condenser microphone is going to give you lots of clarity. It's going to sound very bright and very intimate. But with that, you're going to get all the room noise, every single little sound from your mouth, all your saliva licks and clicks and smacks and whatnot. But with a dynamic microphone, it might sound, with the lower price ones, it's going to sound a little more muddy, but it'll sound deeper, richer. But then you need some more powerful preamps to get some good gain out of it, or it's going to be too quiet. Well, there's a lot that goes into microphones. And if you just want to know the top choices, I would go with the Shure SM7B. That's like the one you see Joe Rogan using and all the other people. But my favorite is the RE20, the Electro Voice RE20. I just think it sounds super natural, and you don't really have to do any post-production equalization. So that's what I'm using right now. I'm using an RE20 and it's plugged into my Rodecaster Pro 2. I just got that. So it's pretty neat. I don't need any cloud lifter with this device and it sounds pretty good. And you might be able to hear the room I'm in right now. It's always a work in progress, treating rooms every time we move space. And my family's here, so if you hear noise in the background, it's just my family being my family. They make noise. All right, let's just say you have your equipment and you're ready to record. So you're going to need to record into some recording software. I like to use Adobe Audition because I've been using that for years. You can use other platforms such as Riverside or Squadcast or Descript or StreamYard. Oh my goodness, there's so many things out there. You can use GarageBand, Audacity. Yeah, there's a lot. It just really depends on what your goals and what you're needing it for, right? So something like Riverside is helpful if you want to record with someone else who's in a different location. And what's neat about Riverside is it will record your video and audio locally, and it'll record your guest's video and audio locally on their computer. And then when recording is done, it uploads the high quality recordings to the cloud, which then you can download and use and to produce your podcast. And there are a bunch of different services out there that are just like them. There's more and more popping up every single day. So if I didn't shout out to your favorite one, I'm sorry. But if you just want something simple, user-friendly, Audacity, GarageBand, and I recommend Adobe Audition because I can help you with that. And I know everything about it inside and out. And I have a bunch of hotkeys and automations. It gets a little crazy. But of course, Descript is wild. If you don't want to learn how to use editing software, then you can use Descript. It's all text-based editing. But of course, there's more software coming out each and every day. Just Google it. Pick the one that you like. Pick the one at your price point that makes you happy. Now, after you have your podcast episode recorded, most people want to do editing, right? So you want to add your music, add your spots, edit out places where you messed up, where you coughed, you sneezed, you farted, I don't know. Whatever you did into the microphone that you don't want people to hear, you're going to do that in the post-production process of editing and then putting all the sound elements and everything together. And then you bounce and mix everything down into one new audio file. And then that audio file, you're going to upload to your hosting service as a 128 MP3. And it needs to be around -16 LUFS. What is that? If you don't know, that's the loudness rating. So if you're trying to figure out what loudness should the final volume be of your podcast file, make it -16 LUFS. That's what Apple recommends. So that's what I went with. Cool. Now, how long does it actually take to do all this and go through this entire launch process? It can take maybe 1 to 2 days to fill out and plan your podcast, and then maybe a few more days to purchase your equipment. I would plan for 1 to 2 weeks to plan your podcast and purchase all your equipment, right? And then in weeks 3 and 4, this is when you start recording your introductions, your outros, and any other show elements that you want to be in every single episode. And in this phase, we are designing our podcast artwork, which can take a week or two, depending on how you go about doing that. The next part during the launch process is recording your seed episodes. So I would record anywhere between 5 to 10 episodes and then send those 5 to 10 episodes to some trusted friends, right? And then put them all together and then try to get some feedback from close friends, close clients, or anyone, just so you can see if this is going to be valuable to them or not, or to your ideal audience. If you have a list already, invite a few people for a special meet and greet and be like, hey, I got a private podcast for you to listen to. No one else knows about it except for you. I'd love to get your feedback. And they'll be like, oh my goodness, I'd love to listen to that. And especially if they're already loving your content. Okay, great. So recording those 5 to 10 episodes, depending on how long and what your life schedule is like, it can take anywhere between 5 to 10 weeks. Okay. And then in weeks 11 and 12, the last 2 weeks, this is when hopefully you're doing this already, right? You're going to want to elect a podcast launch team. So try to get as many friends and family members who will help you in supporting your launch of your podcast. And as soon as it's published and live on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, you want to tell your launch team that it's ready to go, send them all the links and have them post all the links on their social media sites. And setting all that up and getting it connected and up and running, it could take, you can do it in a day, but, realistically, it could take up to 2 weeks, just planning everything and having your launch ready to go, posting pre-launch posts about the podcast, like hyping people up about your new podcast, right? Okay. So ultimately what I've noticed with most of the launches I've gone through, it's been up to 12 weeks, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. It just really depends on your schedule and how motivated you are. If you're wanting to launch in 1 week, it is possible. If you want to launch in one day, yeah, it is possible. But if you want to have a successful launch and a successful podcast, you want to plan and you want to make sure that it is going to benefit you and your listeners. Like that's the most important part. All right, cool. And then after you launch your podcast, you just get into a weekly routine or monthly routine if you do batch recording. And then you're just off to the races. Set a set schedule of when you record every single episode. Have a set schedule of when you edit them and have a set schedule of when you publish them. And so then you'll never miss a recording. And the great thing about doing the seed recordings is that you want to launch with 5 episodes live so people have an opportunity to binge through your new podcast. But then also it's going to give you 5 more episodes in the can. So you always want to be around 4 weeks to 8 weeks ahead. And of course, if something pops up newsworthy and you want to add in a brand new show that's on topic of what's being discussed in that moment, feel free to do that. But it's always great to have a backlog of episodes. So you can take off a couple of weeks of not recording. You can go on vacation. I do recommend batch recording. Try to get 1 day of the month, do 4 episodes, and then you don't have to worry about it again until the next month. But if that's not you, just set a weekly schedule and record every week at the same time. Yeah, it's going to be good. I'm excited for you. I'm excited for you to launch your podcast. And hey, if you have an idea of a podcast that you want to launch, or if you're about to launch one, or if you need help with launching one, I would love to hear about it. Please feel free to reach out. You can do that by emailing me, nick@everyword.media, or by going to everyword.media, everywordmedia.com. Find me on LinkedIn, Nick Chamberlain, or Everyword Media, wherever social media you want to be on. I think I'm on, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. Those are the main ones right now. YouTube. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And if you want me to elaborate on any aspect of the podcast launch process, feel free to let me know and I will do it and I'll make it happen. Anyways, thank you so much for listening. I hope this was helpful and useful to you. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and I look forward to hearing from you. Take care and God bless.